So here's just a quick comparison of ChatGPT 3 and ChatGPT 4. I've asked it a question over several iterations. I started with a very general question right at the top here with how do I write a lambda function called SQS listener which passes an SQS event and writes event time to a DynamoDB table in Node.js. And then I just keep adding things to it. So I've added, I want it with TypeScript, I want it with Jest, with unit coverage, and then eventually I want it to be able to run locally. So go down to the bottom and look at the final question and response. So the final question ends up being, how do I write a lambda function called SQS listener which passes an SQS event and writes event time to a DynamoDB table in Node.js using TypeScript with a unit test written using Jest with test coverage which is runnable locally as a Node project. And if I look through this from ChatGPT 3, it's pretty impressive. So we've got the creation of a Node project, we've got the correct installation of the SDK, the correct installation of some dev dependencies, Jest, the TypeScript, and TypeScript for Jest. If we look at the file, they've called it index.ts, which would be executed. We've got a SQS listener as the main function. It's going through all of the records in an SQS event. It's creating parameters and it's pulling off the event time, which is passed as an int from the sent time, and it's calling DynamoDB to put it into the table, and that's all in a try-catch block. It's also included some Jest config for the running of the tests with coverage, some Babel config. Then we'll have a look at the spec file. It's correctly created a basic mock of an SQS event. It's correctly created a spy for DynamoDB. It's using before all to set up the DynamoDB mock, and then it's correctly calling the mock to be been called once with the table name and with the timestamp. And then if I look at the scripts here, in the package.json, we've got a runnable script for Jest and a runner with Jest with code coverage. Now, if I go to ChatGPT 4 now, and what I did was I just basically copied and pasted the same exact question into it. So how do I write a lambda function called SQS listener which passes an SQS event and writes event time to a DynamoDB table in Node.js using TypeScript with a unit test written using Jest with test coverage which is runnable locally as a Node project. ChatGPT 4 is just a lot more polished. So we've got some instructions up here. We've actually got the command line instructions to do everything this time. So we're initializing a Node project, we're installing the SDK, we're correctly installing the dev dependencies, we're initializing a TypeScript project, we're initializing Jest to be running with TypeScript. If I look at the SQS listener, it's correctly creating an SQS listener. It's going through all of the records and posting a record to a table. Now, really interestingly here, just a subtlety here, is it's now worked out that there's a unique ID on an SQS message. It's the message ID, and that would be a great candidate for a query. So a unique key is now being used, and then event time is just being put into the database. It's in a try-catch block, correctly reporting an error. And if I look at the mock is a lot more refined now as well. So it's creating a mock for the DynamoDB service. It's describing the SQS listener, deleting all mocks, and just look at this now. So the mock there's a lot more in there with the correct attributes for it to be picked up from, and it's picking up the tests for the table name with the item ID and the event timestamp. So a pretty impressive result. Plus it gives you an example of how to run the Jest with coverage using TypeScript.